That's right. Bear down, Bears fans. It's time for another edition of the Chicago Bears podcast, Bears Banter, powered by Second City Gridiron. Bill Zimmerman with you. And we are back on right after, basically a day after doing the post-game show on the 30-12 Monday Night Football debacle that, even though they got their asses kicked, was still somehow better than the debacle the previous week against the 49ers. We are back. We have content to talk about. We have things to discuss because the Chicago Bears, once again, are a dumpster fire with very little to look forward to. This is our lives as Chicago Bears fans, as we have Groundhog Day over and over and over. Every time there's hope, it's shattered in ways that you didn't even know it could be shattered. So we're going to talk about it, and we're going to talk about it with Robert Schmitz. That's right, the Bears content creator you guys all know well. He, of course, used to be Windy City Gridiron, Second City Gridiron, the Bears blog, and now at I think the ripe old age of 30, retired from Bears content. That's right, the Chicago Bears have murdered a content creator. We're going to talk about Robert as he's moving on to bigger and better things, but we're going to talk to him about the Chicago Bears as he exits the content creation space. Looking forward to that one. But let's dive in to where we are with the Chicago Bears. And if you want to get into the specific thoughts that myself and Brian Orenchuk had on the post-game show, you can do that. Go check out the post-game show. It's about an hour long, and I would say we spent 30 to 40 minutes on the actual football game, which is more than I think we actually thought we were going to manage to do. We actually squeezed that much blood from the stone. But let's actually talk about the big picture Chicago Bears, because that's really where we need to be here over the next few weeks. And let's start this, because we're going to talk about Ryan Poles, because that's really where this conversation is right now, is Ryan Poles. But let's start at the quarterback and work our way up to the general manager. And when we get Robert on, we're going to talk about a lot of these same issues, get Robert's opinions on this. So let's start with the quarterback, with Caleb Williams. And there's plenty to be excited about with Caleb Williams. We're still seeing dynamic throws. We're still seeing playmaking ability. We're still seeing pocket awareness and moving around. Despite all the sacks, he's still moving around, avoiding pressure, doing a lot of good things. Now, Caleb Williams peaked earlier in the year. Like, I still think, even though we've seen some other big games, like, this isn't the best Caleb Williams has looked. And I mentioned this on the post-game show. I think a big problem, and I've talked to enough former quarterbacks who tell me the same thing over and over again. Like, when I say, what do you need to have success as a first, second-year quarterback? They don't talk about coaching first. They don't talk about wide receivers first. They all say the same thing. A young quarterback has to trust his protection. And I think Caleb Williams did a pretty good job trusting that protection earlier in the year, even when it wasn't great, even when the Houston Texans assaulted him. I still think he came back and trusted his guys to protect him better against the Colts, and trusted them to be better against the Rams and the Jaguars and the Panthers. Like, he trusted them. And I think what has happened with such woeful protection several weeks in a row, and in varying degrees, sometimes it's ungodly terrible and other times it's just bad, but it hasn't been good. And I think what's happened is that absolute necessity that the quarterback has to have in terms of trusting his protection is gone. And Caleb Williams is now playing with happy feet. He's holding on to the ball too long because it's odd. You almost hold on to the ball too long because you don't trust your protection, because he still doesn't want to force the ball, but now it throws off his timing, his rhythm, everything. And we're not seeing enough things like play action and things to maybe buy some more time, have the defense just a step slower. Not enough is being done there. So Caleb Williams doesn't trust his protection. And it at that point becomes very tough to evaluate what we're seeing from him. But as someone who 100% was behind this move, 100% supported this plan, 100% was, one of the first ones, if not the first one on this train when it was a possibility back in October of last year, I will sit here and say that Caleb Williams, I expected him to be better. Now, I didn't expect Caleb Williams to throw for 4,000 yards and 30 touchdowns. Like, well, if he's a generational quarterback, that's what he needs to do as a rookie. That was insane thoughts. Those were insane thoughts. So when you look at Caleb's numbers and you see a good touchdown to interception ratio, and you see him up around 3,000 yards passing, and he's going to end up with top 5 passing yardage in team history and things like that. You sit there and say, well, Caleb's having a really good year, and he's not having a bad year, especially with what's kind of crumbled around him. I mean, he's on 2 offensive coordinators, technically 3, with Chris Beatty being the offensive coordinator. It's technically his 3rd offensive coordinator this season. His head coach has been fired. He's had some injuries around him offensively. His offensive line can't protect him. His run game is inconsistent. Like, it is a dumpster fire around this kid, and he's still putting out decent numbers. So you tip your cap to him for that kind of stuff. Like, as much as we were down on what the Bears did to Justin Fields, as much as we were down on what could or couldn't have happened with Mitch Trubisky and how that situation was handled with Matt Nagy and Nick Foles and all the stuff that went down there, you can look at all of it and now argue that the Caleb Williams rookie situation is the worst one now. And this was the best situation ever for a rookie quarterback. Now we can look at, this might have been the worst. Mitch Trubisky had a better offensive line. He didn't have any weapons, but he had a better offensive line. Justin Fields had at least an offensive-minded coach that was with him the whole year, had, Allen Robinson and Darnell Mooney to throw to. Like, there were at least a couple pieces there for Justin Fields. Had the same staff with them for the whole year. You didn't have 3 offensive coordinators in one year. It's a dumpster fire around Caleb. So we sit there and tip our cap that he's done pretty well, but we have to be objective about this. We have to sit there and say the accuracy issues are still alarming. And Troy Aikman brought it up on Monday Night Football. Caleb Williams is pissed. And I think happy feet, not setting your feet right, not squaring your body to the throw, the things that you need to do to make the simple passes, he's not doing. Because I think when he sees the target, he's rushing it because he's afraid he's going to get sacked. And I think that's why a lot of this stuff has degenerated over the year, over the season, is because of that confidence issue he has in that offensive line. But the accuracy issues haven't been good. A lot of the benefit of what he's getting in terms of those overall numbers is a volume statistic. His efficiency is really bad. Like, his yards per attempt, you need to be up at 7. If you get over like 8, you're having a hell of a season. Caleb's at like 6.2. That's really bad. Like, the woeful quarterbacks are in the 5s. He's just a little above that. He's not and that's because the passing offense is broken in a lot of ways. We've seen it all talked about with some of the route concepts, what he's doing. But again, he's missing things. He's missing some wide open guys. Caleb is not seeing the field as well as he did earlier. So there's been a little regression. It's unfortunate. It's almost expected with the mess that this season has become, but there's definitely been a little regression with Caleb Williams. Now, I still think, now we're going to get to Ryan Poles. Whatever happens to Ryan Poles, in this case, let's just say he's not here. Kevin Warren then is going to lead this, because this may be a search for GM and head coach simultaneously kind of a thing, and we'll explain why here momentarily. But it's going to be one of those things where this isn't like Ryan Poles came in here with no, Justin Fields allegiance. At this point, the GM head coach that comes in here, this is going to be you're coming now. Whatever you think about the other 52 guys on the roster, that's going to be open to conversation. But this is a Caleb Williams football team, and you are coming in to build Caleb Williams' football team. And you are here to develop Caleb Williams. That is going to be the first and foremost, that's what this conversation is going to be about. Now, if Ryan Poles is here, obviously that's going to change things because general manager is going to keep the players he's brought in here. But if the general manager isn't here, we saw what Ryan Poles did. He stripped everything down around Justin Fields, let Justin Fields burn in year 2, gave him 1 year to try and figure it out. He couldn't, and he was gone. I don't think that's going to be how they're going to operate with Caleb Williams. They have too much invested in him. This is the number 1 overall pick. That he's having a better rookie season than Justin Fields did. You know, objectively, this is not Fields hate. This is just objectively watching Fields as a rookie and watching Caleb as a rookie. Caleb is the better player. Forget comparing him to year 3 Fields. Compare him to rookie Justin Fields. He's the better player. He's in a better place to develop and become more of a special talent here. So when we look at this, we look at that's how this coaching search is going to be. And we talked about it a little bit on the post-game show. The coaching search, while it will technically include Thomas Brown, does not need to include Thomas Brown. This coaching staff is actually worse without Matt Eberflus. Now, that is not a defense of Matt Eberflus. He needed to be fired. The team needed to know that things were going to pivot, that things were changing. You needed to see how the players were going to respond, which they haven't responded very well. We'll get into that. And here's the situation. Thomas Brown is overwhelmed. Eric Washington is overwhelmed. They aren't good at their jobs anymore. And that's okay. You needed to see what you had here, and what you had is not good enough. Washington has this defense regressed from where it was with Matt Eberflus. That's it. Eberflus is a better defensive coordinator. There's no argument. Washington's not good. Soft zones everywhere. The Vikings picked him apart. They still can't stop the run. He hasn't done anything unique, anything special. This is just a lesser version of what Matt Eberflus did. It's kind of like Alan Williams. That's what Washington is here. Forget the off-the-field stuff. I'm not comparing there. Alan Williams, the defensive coordinator. Eric Washington, the defensive coordinator. Tell me I'm wrong. What differences do you see? It's not good. Offensively, Thomas Brown. And this is what I said. And you guys all got pissed at me when I'm like, Thomas Brown has just made the offense functional. It wasn't functional with Shane Waldron in the last few weeks. Thomas Brown made it functional again. And everyone said, oh my God, he's great. And I was like, hey, it's better. This is nice. Let's see what he can do, but let's not pretend that he's reinventing the wheel here. And the offense has gotten worse. It's regressing back to where it was. Thomas Brown is not doing enough different things. He's not going to reinvent the offense, but this is still an offense that we saw can do things against the Vikings. And yeah, that was Thomas Brown. And we saw what it could do against the Jaguars and the Panthers. And yeah, those were bad defenses. But we've seen an offense that can function. And Thomas Brown hasn't done enough to get back to those. Thomas Brown hasn't cleaned up the poor route concepts and made sure there's better spacing in the routes there. Thomas Brown hasn't cleaned up pass protection and done better things. Thomas Brown and Chris Morgan left Karan Amagaji out to rot at left tackle. It didn't do anything to make his job easier against Jonathan Grenard yesterday, and he got embarrassed. Absolutely embarrassed. So the coaching is bad. Thomas Brown is not a head coach candidate. It's over. It was probably over after the 49ers game, but you can put all the nails in the coffin on that one. I don't think there's anyone that's still supporting him. When I said it was probably going to fail, you're being a hater. Yeah, I'm being a realist. If you want to call that being a hater, that's fine. But the bottom line here is Thomas Brown probably wasn't going to be the guy, but they had to make sure, and now they've made sure, and they're going to be crappy for the next 3 weeks. Maybe they win a game, maybe they don't, and here they are with the 8th pick in the draft, and whoop-de-damn-do. That's where the Chicago Bears are for 2024, because they are swimming in a dumpster fire, and that dumpster fire, unfortunately, was created by the man who put these players on the field. And that man is Ryan Poles. And Dan Wiederer last week, I almost wanted to do an emergency podcast over an article. I couldn't do it, but Dan Wiederer put a blowtorch to Ryan Poles. And oh, baby, was that straight fire. But here's what I would say. That was not a hit piece. That was a fair piece. He did go over the positives of Ryan Poles' tenure, but he did a lot on the negatives, and there are plenty of negatives to talk about. And that's to me, the Matt Eberflus stuff, we're going to get into the Matt Eberflus stuff, and that's a problem. But the bigger problem to me is some of this roster construction stuff, because Ryan Poles has the same problem that Ryan Pace had, and that's smartest man in the room syndrome. It's a bad thing to have if you think. Now, again, we thought Ryan Poles was above that because he could admit mistakes and not hold on to things too long. But it's about making those decisions initially, and that's where it's alarming. Like Chase Claypool. The Pittsburgh Steelers wanted to get rid of him. The Pittsburgh Steelers know how to deal with difficult receivers and get the most out of them. Antonio Brown, George Pickens, like Deontay Johnson. Like the list goes on and on. And with Chase Claypool, they said, we don't want this guy. And the league went, ooh. And the Steelers fans celebrated that trade. Basically celebrated. I worked at Mad Dog Radio at the time. I was the executive producer. And Adam Shine, who's got a lot of contacts around the league, opened his show that next day with the Chase Claypool trade and ripped into the Bears like nothing you could believe. Just shredded them to pieces about acquiring this clown, Chase Claypool. And he was 100% right. It was an absolute dumpster fire from the jump, and Chase Claypool didn't even make it a year. The Bears went, 1-13 with Chase Claypool on the roster? It was a humiliation. He was a disaster for this team. And why was he here? And why did they give up the 32nd pick in the draft for him? Because Ryan Poles didn't listen to any noise. He goes, I can fix Chase Claypool. I'm Ryan Poles. I'm building a great culture. I can handle Chase Claypool. No, he couldn't. The Nate Davis situation, and I bring this up, and I say this, and I genuinely mean it. I am not trying to puff myself up like I'm some big NFL insider. I'm not. I've been in media for 25 years. I've gotten to know a lot of people. The media likes to talk to each other. We hear things. We share things. That's how this works. So I will come across information inconsistently. I'm not Adam Schefter. I'm not Ian Rappaport, but that's how I was able to put together Justin Fields Market, because I knew people in Pittsburgh and in Atlanta and in Las Vegas and covering these teams or, involved in the organization, whether it's media or actual kind of like scout types. And I asked them, I'm like, so you guys, Justin Fields, what do you think? Coming back, not interested, not interested, not interested, not interested, not interested. Like, and I sat there, I'm like, there's no market for this guy. I trust the people I'm talking to. They proved out to be 100% accurate. I talked to someone that I know talked to someone in the Falcons organization, and the Falcons had no interest in Justin Fields. And Tony Pauline, he gets good information, and that's why this information game is hard. Tony Pauline came out and said, oh, there's this trade out there, and the Bears and the Falcons and the second round pick or whatever it was. And I'm talking to a guy, he's like, that is not true. And I kept saying, I don't think so, guys. I don't think so, guys. I bring that up to just talk about Nate Davis. And I went and I talked to a couple people in Nashville after it. I'm like, hey, what can you tell me about Nate Davis? I didn't say, hey, anything bad about Davis. I said, hey, I thought it was going to be positive. I really did. I thought I was going to, hey, Nate Davis signed. The Bears need some offensive line help. Let me get some info and let me fuel the fire and say, hey, guys, the Bears signed a good one. And I got back, just fire the other direction. And I put it out because I'm like, hey, I'm hearing out of Nashville that this was not a guy that Nashville wanted around. Mike Vrabel wanted to move on from him. That's why he didn't stick around. Mike Vrabel didn't want him on the team anymore. They didn't even offer him a contract. They just let him go for nothing. And the Bears signed him. And you sit there and say, oh, well, what's the big deal? They didn't. Yeah. Here's the thing. If that information is available to me, that information was available to Ryan Poles. To make matters worse, and this is where the Wiederer piece is really interesting to me. He said warnings from the coaching staff. Now, the coaching staff that was in place when Nate Davis was signed, one of the coaches was Luke Steckel. And I'm not saying I know that Luke Steckel was the guy, but I think you can make a very logical jump that if the coaching staff is complaining that saying this is a bad idea, that it was Luke Steckel. And why? Luke Steckel, I think, was the Bears' assistant offensive line coach. And you know what he was? He was in Tennessee for like 7 or 8 years before that. So the entire 4 years that Nate Davis was in Tennessee, Luke Steckel was with him. And then Luke Steckel comes to the Bears, and Ryan Poles is sitting there going, I think we're going to sign Nate Davis. And Luke Steckel goes, don't you do it. That is a bad idea. He is going to be a problem here. And Ryan Poles goes, I've got my culture. I can fix Nate Davis. I can do it because I'm Ryan Poles. Forget Mike Vrabel's culture. I've got the Ryan Poles culture, and that will fix everything. And guess what? It didn't. And I think it's really interesting when we talk about Ryan Poles up on that podium when he first got hired about how he's an offensive lineman and he's going to build the trenches. And all he's done is ignored them. And maybe he thought he was so good, he was going to outsmart everybody with the trenches. And he was going to sit there, and he was going to get Doug Kramer in the 6th round, and Doug Kramer was going to be awesome. And he was going to get Jatiri Carter, and Jatiri Carter was going to be awesome. And Braxton Jones in the 5th, and Braxton Jones was going to be awesome. And he was going to find all these guys. And then he'll get Darnell Wright in round 1, but he's going to pick up all these guys. And they're going to hit because he knows what he's doing and he's better than everyone else. And I thought Ryan Pace kind of had Adam Shaheen in the 2nd round. Like he kind of had that I'm going to outsmart everyone too kind of thing. Didn't work out for Ryan Pace too well either. Sam Mustipher, UDFA starting center. Like this is what happens when you outsmart yourself. And that's what Ryan Poles has done. So this gets us to the Karan Amagaji debacle, which is the only thing I want to discuss from last night's game. Because Karan Amagaji was horrendous. His PFF grade that came out was 39. I thought it was going to be worse, but it was 39. He got humiliated by Jonathan Grenard early. There was another pressure he gave up shortly after that. And you know what Amagaji said? He goes, I'm not getting Caleb killed. He started tackling his like he got called for two holds, I think it was. Like if you watched him, he held like every play, and not just like holding like offensive line holds on every play. No, like he was wrapping arms around guys. He knew he was outmatched out there and just decided not to get his quarterback killed. So tip of the cap for Karan. Yale guy knew when to throw the white flag, but he was out there for the whole game, had to make the best of it. He was outmatched, had no business being out there. And that's the problem, because Karan Amagaji had no business being out there. And Karan Amagaji, if you watched his tape and you knew anything about football in April, you knew he had no business being out here this whole season. I talked about it. Ryan Poles even mentioned that he wasn't going to push for playing time. He said right away. He should have said this season. He said right away. That's a little bit of an alarm there. Jeff Berkus, Lester, like the whole group here at Second City Gridiron, we're all telling you, hey, don't think Karan Amagaji. No, slow down. He was a reach in round 3. They should have gone interior offensive line. Poles went for a toolsy tackle, and this is where we ended up. This was not a good decision, but regardless, he shouldn't have been on the field. And you sit there and say, well, it's not his fault that Braxton Jones got hurt and this and that. No, it's not. He needed to have a good swing tackle option. His swing tackle was Larry Borum. Why was it Larry Borum? First of all, Larry Borum got a raise for the amount of snaps he had his first 3 seasons. He should have been cut to save a few $1 million. But they didn't do it. They kept Larry Borum, which means Poles believed in Larry Borum. And we know Larry Borum is a spotty swing tackle. And that's what, well, he brought in Matt Pryor. Okay, and I like Matt Pryor. And I said I liked the signing at the time. But Matt Pryor can't be a swing tackle if he's playing right guard. And why is he playing right guard? Because he had to cut Nate Davis's ass because that failed. And why did he have to play Matt Pryor instead of Ryan Bates? Because Ryan Bates hasn't been healthy for years, but he traded for him. So now when we sit here and say that Ryan Bates didn't work and Nate Davis didn't work, And then it builds. Well, yeah, Matt Pryor's going to have to fill there because he was the third option at right guard. And then when you get to what should be the second option at left tackle, he's no longer available because Ryan Poles, not only has he not invested enough resources into the offensive line, the resources he has invested haven't worked out. They have missed. They have failed because Ryan Poles effed up this. I keep it clean, this offensive line. And that's the bottom line here. Nate Davis was a huge swing and a miss. Ryan Pates was a little swing and a miss. And both those misses forced Matt Pryor inside. And Larry Borum was still on this roster and healthy. So he had a healthy Larry Borum, and Nate Davis is healthy. He may be on his sofa eating Doritos, but he's healthy right now. And neither of those guys could play because they stink at football or don't care. And then now Karan Amagaji has to play against Jonathan Grenard and get his ass kicked and get Caleb Williams. We're lucky Caleb Williams' arm wasn't ripped out by the socket on that sack. He has no business protecting his blind side. None. And how this medical staff can't figure out concussions. Maybe Braxton Jones didn't report them, but Roshan Johnson's got, Jaquan Brisker's been out on a concussion for 2 months. Roshan Johnson's out for a whole month. I don't know if they don't assess, if they don't treat concussions well, but I don't know if I see other teams other than Tua and obvious his issues that have concussions that last 2, 3, 4 weeks as often as they do for the Chicago Bears. It's very odd to me. But regardless, this offensive line is hot garbage. And then we look at the rest of what Ryan Poles has done. We said at the beginning of the year, there is no depth on this defensive line. When Andrew Billings went down, this defensive line died. And Andrew Billings is a good player. That was a good signing. And that's where we have this problem with Ryan Poles, is he can have a good signing like TJ Edwards and a good signing like Andrew Billings and the great trade for DJ Moore and the number 1 pick. He can do these things, but when the draft picks he makes do not become blue chip, high-end talented players, when he outsmarts himself and doesn't, it's also about resource investment. So not only is he not getting high-end talent, where are the resources being spent? Now, the Bears still have a lot of money here, but the center position this year is not going to get fixed based on who's available in free agency and in this draft. The center position had a lot of options last year. Zach Frazier, Jackson Powers Johnson, Graham Barton, 3 guys. Other centers, second-tier centers were available in the draft. Lloyd Cushenberry, several centers were available in free agency. We went with Coleman Shelton, 1 year, $3 million. He didn't fix the center position when it was a good year to fix the center position. Now next year it sucks. So he didn't invest resources in the offensive line. He didn't invest a lot. He paid Sweat. But other than that, he didn't invest a lot of resources in the defensive line. He spent on linebackers, a position that is interchangeable a lot in today. He, he paid for DeAndre Swift after he let David Montgomery go. He paid for Nate Davis after he let James Daniels go. He paid big for Keenan Allen after he let Darnell Mooney go. Do you see what's happening here? He paid Tremaine Edmonds after he let Roquan Smith go. There's a lot of questionable decisions here. And this allocation of resources where you decide to pay DeAndre Swift $8 million, when you decide to pay Keenan Allen $23 million when you already have DJ Moore and, potentially Rome Odunze there. And again, I didn't argue with the Keenan Allen trade. They needed someone like that for Caleb Williams, but you chased Darnell Mooney out of here. They gave him an insulting offer. Darnell Mooney wanted to be extended before the 2023 season, and Ryan Poles insulted him with an offer that pissed off Mooney. Then Fields stopped throwing him the football because DJ Moore was here, and he wanted the heck out of here. So Darnell Mooney got soured on this organization, and it started with a crappy offer from Ryan Poles. Jalen Johnson is the team's best player by far, and Ryan Poles told him to go seek a trade, and if he got a late 1 or an early 2 offer, Jalen was gone. you have to look at these decisions from Ryan Poles and go, sure, he's made some good picks. Sure, he's picked up a couple decent guys. Yeah, he's got the Panthers trade, but this is not some home run resume. And after Kevin Warren preached just how much he loved, Ryan, well, he didn't say he loved Ryan Poles, but Ryan Poles is the Bears general manager, and he's going to lead the search. And I sat there and said, there's no way they're getting rid of Ryan Poles. He gave him an actual vote of confidence, not the dreaded vote of confidence. I don't know, because that Wiederer piece, I feel that may have come from Halas Hall, and if it came from Halas Hall, it may have come from Kevin Warren. I am not saying that Kevin Warren is the source for Dan Wiederer's piece. I do not know that. That is important. I do not know if Kevin Warren is the source for a lot of Dan Wiederer's piece, but I would not be surprised if Kevin Warren is the source for a lot of Dan Wiederer's piece, because a lot of that came from Halas Hall. And it was very interesting to me that that piece aligned Ryan Poles with Matt Eberflus, when the consensus was that Poles got saddled with Eberflus, and everyone gave him a pass about Eberflus. Well, the Bears gave him the finalists, and Ryan Poles had to pick, and he picked the same coach from his agent, Trace Armstrong, and that's how that happened. But that piece made it seem that, no, that was who Ryan Poles wanted in the interview process before even Eberflus was a finalist. This was a long-time partnership, a long-time idea, and that once they were in the building together, Poles was an Eberflus guy. And that was a big piece of that story. And that sounds to me like someone at Halas Hall who wants to change the perception on the general manager and saying, hey, don't just assume that this was all about just he getting saddled with a guy. This was a guy he wanted. That was a very interesting angle. And kind of saying that, hey, Nate Davis, he needs to wear. This was not anything from the coaching staff. Like, he made sure that Ryan Poles has to wear a couple of those mistakes. And that's how you change the perception on a general manager when he's got a pretty good public perception, is you make sure that the pieces that the Bears fans hate, the general manager wears. And that's how you can warm up his seat, and that's how you can get him the hell out of Dodge. And maybe you have to. Maybe Ben Johnson, when he tells Albert Breer, who reports on Amazon, that Ben Johnson wants to align GM and head coach, maybe that did not mean that Ryan Poles needs an extension to work with Ben Johnson. Maybe that means that Ray Agnew is coming with Ben Johnson. Mike Vrabel, my big stance on Mike Vrabel is that he was not going to work for an organization that had chairman, president, general manager Mike Vrabel. He wanted access to the top. And I said, well, that's not how the Bears operate. That's what Jim Harbaugh wanted, and Jim Harbaugh couldn't get that. And that's why Jim Harbaugh isn't here. Jim Harbaugh might have been here 3 or 4 years ago if the Bears were willing to do that. But they didn't want to give a head coach that much power. But Mike Vrabel, maybe Kevin Warren's willing to give him that much power and have a GM that is equal and not a report, and that they both report to Kevin Warren. There could be a power structure change here at Halas Hall. So where I said I didn't think Vrabel was a guy they'd seriously consider, if Ryan Poles isn't here and they're changing the way they do things at Halas Hall, Mike Vrabel may be a guy they consider. Now, I'm a Ben Johnson guy because I think the offensive coordinator aspect with Caleb Williams is more important, and there are other ways to build a culture than a hard ass like Mike Vrabel. But this whole thing is fascinating, very fascinating as to where this is headed. And the hot seat on Ryan Poles is an inferno. I really think that, because I think the fan base has really, really, really lost interest in keeping him around. We're going to get to all this with Robert Schmitz. He joins me next. This is Bill Zimmerman, Bears Banter. We'll be right back. Welcome back into the podcast. This was kind of an unscheduled guest. Wasn't planning on doing this one, was working on a couple different ones. Then I saw a tweet go out last week that was just a bon voyage from this guy. I've been talking to him and working with him on different and various podcasts for the last 6 years or so. We've done a lot of different things together. We've been doing those training camp previews, all the things we've been doing at Second City Gridiron, Windy City Gridiron. Of course, he moved to the Bears blog and was the editor there. He is Robert Schmitz, and he is retiring. Maybe it'll be a Michael Jordan retirement, and he'll be back in 18 months. I don't know, but it is a retirement from Bears content creation. Robert Schmitz joins me now. Robert, Bill Zimmerman, how you doing?
I'm doing all right, Bill. I mean, I'm not dead, so I never want to act like I know what the future holds, but it is my personality to be very all in or all out. I want to make sure people know what to expect from me, and right now, I don't expect anything from myself, and I don't want to pretend to people like there's more coming. At least right now, I'm joining the ranks of millions of other Bears fans that watch the game and, Bill, get the luxury of turning it off. I mean, I've been in your shoes for 5 to 6 years. You had to do a post-game show about that last night. How did that feel?
Oh, man, that was rough. We'll get into all this, but I just got to ask one question.
Hit me.
I need to know if the Bears murdered your soul, because I want to know if the Chicago Bears right now were, let's say, 10-4.
Right.
And Caleb had 3,700 yards and 28 touchdowns right now. Obviously, Eberflus is still the coach. Everything's humming. The defense is top 10. Are you still retiring?
So, good question. I wish I could answer that, right? I've been wanting to have an answer to that question for the 6 years I've been covering the team. But in case you didn't know, my first podcast that I submitted in the fan post of Windy City Gridiron was after the Week 11 Jets game of the 2018 season. And it literally was all downhill from there. Like, from that moment,
the Tariq Cohen screen touchdown. I remember that
game. Then we got the 2019 season, which was outrageously disappointing because the team didn't take a step forward, they took a step back. We got the 2020 season where you either hated Nick Foles, completely justified, or you hoped that Nick Foles would save what felt like the dying embers of something fun from 2018. Then we all kind of wasted our time in 2021. Then in 2022, things got worse. 2023, we said, okay, finally we may get something fun to cover. And it really wasn't. And now we got this. We're in the middle of an 8-game losing streak. So, like, would things have been different? Dude, I don't know. But there is a point, and I'm sure you're feeling it, I know everybody is, where the current Bears cycle just starts to stick on you a little bit. Like, you feel as if you're having the same argument for at least a third time in 5 years, and the fan base stops talking. Because I don't know about you, Bill. I personally think the most frustrating part about the Bears over the last couple of years is that we've spent a shockingly large time not talking about football. Instead of talking about defensive line play or the way that the Bears are molding their linebacker coverages with what they're doing with their safeties, or maybe the rotation that they've got going on in corners or defensive linemen or anything on offense, of which there are a litany of things, we keep talking about coach firings, GM firings, GM hirings, GM hiring impacts, saying to ourselves, I don't really know what they'll do. I haven't seen them ever do it yet. And hoping that the quarterback walks in and saves everything. That's familiar to us, isn't it? And it's like, here we are again.
Yeah, no, it's a vicious cycle. And as a content creator, and I know a lot of people sit there, oh, it's fun. You're talking football, even if they're bad. And it is a lot of times. I'm not going to sit here and say like it's a punishment, but I will say the December first week of January content when the Bears are 6-11 and bad with Matt Nagy early, so you knew it was over. And then the 3-14 debacle and 7-10, but again, they started off 0-4 and you knew it was over early. And then to have the hope this year and have it ripped to shreds like this, and you knew where it was after Thanksgiving. Yeah, you had the Matt Eberflus fired bump, but again, we're sitting in another December where it's a grind where you sit there, like, because for me, for my podcasts, you know, I don't do like the preview like Taylor Dahl does here. I don't do like you did the post-game show, that really, Bear balanced, like that reaction. I like to do kind of big picture where I take some aspects of the football game or some of the aspects of the football game coming up. I bring it together and talk about what's going on with this football team on and off the field. And what happens in around December 1st when you're doing that kind of content is your content just becomes the same thing. Yep. And you basically repackage it a new way every week. And it was Matt Eberflus. Then he gets fired. And it's like, all right, let's see what we got with Thomas Brown. That lasted a week. And now it's going to be Ryan Poles until we get to hiring a new coach or possibly a new general manager. So, yeah, so it does get difficult.
And there's another team out there, Bill. I know it because I'm looking at them, right? That's sitting here joking about how good Jordan Love is during Toyotathon. Or they're begging questions on, is Sean Payton good enough to even take Bo Nix's current form and win a playoff game? Or how is Andy Reid and Matt Nagy, ironically, going to overcome losing Mahomes for a couple weeks? Could this reset Mahomes? What fun questions to ask, right? That we just haven't gotten to. And we've wanted to ask them. Worst part about this season, if you ask me, is that it actually started looking like the positive version of what we hoped the season would be. I still can't believe they started 4-2 and then had the gall to lose 8 straight games. But I mean, it has truly been like we've covered a lot of seasons for Mel, but this has been, I think, the worst one. Because 2022, I don't know if you felt this way. You could smell a tank coming. 2023, ironically, the team was actually pretty much who we thought they were after they lost in September. And as the saying goes, you can't win a marathon in September. You can lose it, though. And the Bears did, which is fine. It happened.
And the other aspect of 2023, which was a lot of fun, was the death of the Carolina Panthers.
Yeah, that was great.
it created chaos on Twitter, and I understand that. But for people who were big supporters of Caleb Williams, especially college, we're going to get into Caleb Williams. We're just going to start there, and we'll get into some other things. But what was the best route for the Bears moving forward? And I think you and I were pretty much in lockstep during the season when it's October and November and the Panthers just keep losing games. And I'm literally doing Survivor on my podcast, eliminating teams as they win. And every week, just another team wins, because the whole point was if you have 4 wins, you'll never get the number 1 pick. So anytime a team reached 4 wins, I just kept wiping them off the table. And all that was standing was the Carolina Panthers. Like, that was fun. So at least there was something to pull out of that. And of course, all the stuff with Caleb Williams after that. But yeah, it does get to a grind. So let's talk.
One other thing. Ooh, Bill, I got one more for you.
What do you got?
Just because I know you're going to resonate with this. The other thing that has been pretty tough about the last couple of years of covering the Bears, and I say this not because I'm trying to complain, but because Bears fans listening, I think you'll resonate with this, right? Is that sane-minded people have come up with NFL rational arguments for why trading for Keenan Allen is an objectively good idea, right? Or why extending DJ Moore after the season that he had is an objectively good idea. Or how you can take a Coleman Shelton type, put him next to Nate Davis, historically solid offensive lineman in Tennessee, and Tevin Jenkins, really good when he plays. And this can be a workable offensive line with 2 tackles that can handle their business. But Bill, you've seen it. The Bears' returns against rational decision-making are at like an 8% return rate. It is wild how rarely normal-minded things seem to work out for the Bears. And they can instill in you this deep cynicism where, I mean, you've seen it. This is the joke about the Chicago Tribune, right? Sorry, any Tribune listeners, where it's like, they're just negative about the Bears because they're negative. They're right most of the time.
Or are they accurate? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's like, are they just being negative to be negative, or are they trying to tell you the truth? It can be hard to tell because it's so skewed in one direction. And I find that pretty tough to deal with, especially watching the last 2 games where
and off that point, and I was actually talking to someone about this today, and look, if some of you are this way and you roll your eyes at me, that's fine. But a lot in my timeline based on some of the comments, because I was high on the Bears coming into this season.
Of course.
Last year, when I was not high on that Bears team going into the season and didn't make a lot of expectations. Bears fans were just doing, you're just ruining it. You're just a hater, all this kind of stuff. Then fast forward to this season and being positive going into the season about the Chicago Bears and where we are now. It's just like, well, you were dead wrong. You didn't know what you were talking about. So it gets into this. All right, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. So unless 100%. You're just, if you're right and they stink, people are mad at you. If you think they're going to be good and they stink, people are mad at you. The only way people are going to be happy with you is if you think they're good and they're good, which just doesn't happen because they're the Chicago Bears.
Yeah,
and if it is going to happen, Robert, it's going to happen because Caleb Williams is going to figure this out, hopefully with the right coach, and become the guy that a lot of us hope we think he can be. So I'm going to ask you, because we've talked a little bit on the Twitter DMs and everything, that you think Caleb Williams is a terrible quarterback and you wish that they had Bo Nix.
No. So let's really, this is where I think it can be hard sometimes. Let's just call it out like it is, Bill. The hardest part about being a Bears fan is you got to have faith in something, or you're just a sad person. I've been there, right? So we look at Caleb Williams, we see the flashes, and we say, well, the Bears have their guy, right? And it's like, well, from a volume stat perspective, Caleb's had a great season. Like, the flashes are there in almost every single game. You see pocket movement. You see creativity. You see play from the pocket. That ball Rome had the gall to drop last night was a beautiful throw. One I haven't seen in Chicago, honestly, since Jay. And Jay had a propensity to throw it straight at the linebacker another half the time that he attempted to throw that ball. Caleb, the pickless streak thing is neat. But, Bill, we do have really haywire footwork, a lot of really poor throws, a bunch of moments where it's clear Caleb doesn't know what he's looking at. It's been a really normal rookie season, if you ask me. It is my opinion that the rookies that can do the most are the least polished when they get to the NFL. A guy like Caleb Williams, if you think about it like a decision tree, Bill, the guy like Caleb Williams has almost 1,000 more decisions to make, it feels like, than a guy like Nick Foles. Nick Foles can't get out of the way of most of these edge rushers. So he has to throw the ball. It's part of why Mac Jones, if you ask me, had such a good rookie season and fell off from there. There wasn't anywhere to go with his game, right? But once he got to the NFL, he did one thing well. He polished it. And from there, defenses learned how to take it away. In Caleb's case, he is remolding his game to fit the NFL. And guess what? It's been a pretty bumpy road. And traditionally, that would be completely normal. Except the worst part, if you ask me, Bill, is that Caleb has been like the 6th worst player on the offense. And the fact that there's 5 worst players on the offense week in, week out is astounding. I mean, I'm sure you felt this way, where the protection is playing worse than Caleb is. Caleb's just not playing great sometimes, but it's a rookie quarterback. Bill, when you and I set out expectations for this season, I think both you and I thought that the receivers and the line and the running game would make things at least a little easier. But they haven't. In fact, I think they've made things harder. What we hoped was a historically good supporting cast for a number 1 overall pick. I was just talking about this with Quentin Crisco, has instead seen a coaching staff seemingly highlight the worst trait of almost every player on the offense and feature it. Which you would think is joking, but gosh, hasn't it looked that way?
No, it really has. How much DJ Moore was a fish out of water early on. I mean, a little better now. But yeah, right? It was a lot of bizarre decisions by this offense. And look, I know Thomas Brown is still calling plays, but by title, Caleb Williams is on his 3rd offensive coordinator. Like, when the Bears can't make things worse, they make things worse. He's on his 3rd offensive coordinator of his rookie season. Ryan Poles, the guy who was here to break cycles. Like, I guess he's breaking cycles because we've never seen things go this poorly for Trubisky or Fields. And Fields' rookie year was a disaster.
It was a disaster. And then, Bill, it's beyond funny and gets to the point where it's just sad that you promoted the passing coordinator to offensive coordinator. You then promoted him to head coach, and shocker, the Bears don't even try to run the ball anymore. Caleb Williams, I don't know if you saw this, has a 12% play action rate, which is what are you doing? By far the lowest in the league since Thomas Brown took over. And it's like, what are we doing? Well, the passing game coordinator's a coach now. And Caleb is out here. Am I allowed to talk about pressers on your podcast? A lot of people don't let me talk about pressers because, like, I don't know, it's a player's image front, right? But Caleb, I swear, Bill, is giving some of the most mature answers that I could have asked for from a 22-year-old, right? Like, he comes up in the middle of an 8-game losing streak and talks about how, of course this is tough, but it's also a challenge and it's a real boon to see the way that this team is responding in the face of adversity. And I'm like, hot dog, that sounds like a leader. But,
Right.
you need the results to follow eventually. But
yeah.
I hope they will.
and the one other thing I want to say about Caleb, and I want to get your thoughts on this, because obviously you need the right offensive coach, but I've talked to enough former quarterbacks in the league and asked them, like, what, this was about Trubisky, this was about Fields, like, what do you need? And they all say the one thing over a coach is that the quarterback has to trust the protection. Not just that the protection has to be there, but he has to trust the protection. Like Sam Darnold with the Jets was getting protection, but he didn't trust it. He didn't think he was getting protection, and he was a disaster. Like, obviously, you see Darnold now, he trusts this protection. He's become a much better quarterback, whatever you think of him, where he is exactly. He's having a great season with Kevin O'Connell. So when I look at Caleb Williams, I felt like he trusted that protection early on, even though maybe with the Texans and some of these games he shouldn't have, but I felt like he stood in there and took it. And I think over the course of this year, especially with how bad the protection's been and how inconsistent it's been, I don't think he does anymore. And I think the haywire footwork that you mentioned has gotten there, and it wasn't perfect early on. I'm not saying that, and I'm certainly not a technician with tape and look and study it like you do. But when I look at it, I feel like things have gotten worse, and I feel like it's because the situation is crumbling around him, and he doesn't know what to do.
I feel like he keeps going back and forth, if you can believe me. I mean, he took 9 sacks against the Patriots. So to say he doesn't trust the protection is probably kind of silly, right? We've watched the Kyle Orton types that will just rocket the ball to nobody so that they don't get hit. Obviously, to get hit that many times, 6 sacks against Arizona, 9 against the Patriots. I can't remember. I think there was
7 was Houston. I
was about to say 7 against Houston. I think he had at least a couple more, like 5+ sacks games, and one recently. He is standing in there and taking hits, but he seems built like he goes back and forth between, all right, I got to trust the protection, and then his operation's a little slow. Hey, rookie, I get it. Right. But then on the next play, he gets frenetic and whizzes a ball 4 feet wide of Keenan Allen on a play that maybe Keenan was supposed to keep running, maybe not. Always hard to tell. The fact that they're still working this out in whatever week we're in is sad to me, but that's besides the point. It is, I think, hard to watch, to be honest with you, Bill, because if he trusts the protection, then he has to take his first read. But I don't think anybody's talked about how I saw a stat just the other day that I believe Caleb Williams is, if not the worst in, bottom 5 in first route open rate, which is a very, very specific statistic. But it feels that way on the tape, where Caleb picked to go here, that guy's not open. Most quarterbacks get that open like 65% of the time. The Bears are getting that open about 40% of the time, Bill. So doggone, don't you understand it a little when Caleb Williams goes first read? No. Second read, you should throw it there. But his eyes waver just a little bit, like happens to rookies all the time. Suddenly he's in the pocket for a little too long, primes to throw to his third read, and Karan Amigdaji lets his guy just walk right around him. Right?
Yeah. Oh God, that poor hit, that pour sack. Oh my, I felt so bad for Caleb on that one. But all right, we got a lot to get to,
it's a tornado of all the things in sermonization.
It really is. So I want to talk mostly about Ryan Poles, but let's just take 2 minutes to talk about the next coach. And I'm just going to give you basically a general layup here, because whether it is or is not at Hallis Hall, right now it's a 2-horse race for the fan base between Ben Johnson and Mike Vrabel. That's it. We got Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator guy who's going to work with Caleb. We've got Mike Vrabel, the culture changer, who's going to fix everything that's broken. Yep. For you, if it was just Vrabel or Ben Johnson, and you don't get to know right now who Mike Vrabel's offensive coordinator is, Vrabel or Ben Johnson, who do you want to coach the Bears?
So I'll give it to you in terms of money, right? Mike Vrabel is the safest option possible. This is buying a government bond, right? You will get some maturity on it, Bill, but you won't see it for a long time, at least not probably. And there's very little chance that you're going to make a lot of money. I believe Ben Johnson is the mutual fund, okay? People are going to act like he's a penny stock. He's not. This is historically how most teams succeed, is taking the best offensive coordinator on the market, or at least one of the best options. It doesn't have to be the best coordinator on the market. I'm sure you get that, Bill. We didn't think Matt LaFleur was that guy when the Packers hired him. They were obviously right to do it. We didn't think that Kevin O'Connell was this guy when the Vikings hired him. They were obviously right to do it. So maybe it isn't Ben. Maybe it's Liam Cohen. Maybe it's Drew Petzing. Maybe it's Todd Monken. I'm going to tell you right now, neither of us are going to know because we don't get to interview him, right? But given the limited information we have, give me the offensive coordinator. That's the path to success. You need to do what you can to make Caleb good, because if Caleb's bad, the roster doesn't matter. Is that too aggressive? Is that me being too analytical?
No, that's totally fair. And to me, it's pick what you want to fix. Do you want to make sure you get Caleb Williams right, or do you want to make sure the locker room is right? And I don't think there's a wrong answer, and I don't want to spend time talking about Jim Harbaugh, because that boat sailed. I know Bears fans are upset. It wasn't a chance. It wasn't going to happen last year. He wanted to go to California, and Tom Pelissero said that, and I 100% believe him on that case. That Jim Harbaugh sailed in 2018 when Matt Nagy was hired, and I don't think Jim Harbaugh had really been an option since. That's the culture changer / offensive guy. That guy doesn't exist this year. So it's pick either one. The Bears need both. My hope is that Ben Johnson can bring in other coaches that can fix that culture. And if you start winning creates a much better culture. And that would be the hope there, is that they start getting things on the right page. But if they get things on the right page, it's going to be fascinating to me what they do with the general manager, with Ryan Poles. Because if you asked me 2 weeks ago, is Ryan Poles safe? I would have said, yes, absolutely, 100%. The Kevin Warren press conference, I know it's the dreaded vote of confidence, but that wasn't just like, we believe in Ryan Poles. That was, Ryan Poles is the general manager of the Bears, and he is going to lead this coaching search. Right. It seemed like it was 100%. Now, I said this before on my little opening monologue on this podcast, that the Dan Wiederer article on Friday, I am not saying this is the case, and I'm going to repeat it again. I am not saying this is the case. I do not know who Dan Wiederer's sources were for that article. He shouldn't share them with me. That is not a thing you should do as a reporter. But a lot of that information to me felt like it had to have come out of Hallis Hall. And perhaps it came from coaches who were fired and things like that are no longer there.
Could be.
But to me, it felt like someone in Hallis Hall that was trying to change the perception of a general manager who had a very favorable outlook by a lot of the fan base. Like, I thought the fan base mostly was, I like Ryan Poles, or I'm indifferent to Ryan Poles, but not many people disliked what Ryan Poles had done. And that's been starting to waver. And that article, which pinned Matt Eberflus on Ryan Poles, and Nate Davis, which I want to talk to you about a little bit further as well, really pinned them both on Ryan Poles. And what are Matt Eberflus and Nate Davis? They are the two hottest button topics on how to piss off Bears fans right now. Matt Eberflus was disliked and Nate Davis was hated. Like, that's how the Bears fans felt about him. So suddenly Dan Wiederer writes an article that's sourced and says, hey, these things were Ryan Poles and only Ryan Poles' decision. To me, feels like perhaps when Dan Wiederer was a reporter for the Vikings and Kevin Warren happened to work for the Vikings, that there is a distinct possibility that information came from Kevin Warren. And again, I repeat, I do not know if that is the case. That is simply how it feels to me. And I heard a couple people say to me, well, Kevin Warren wouldn't do that. He's a religious guy. He's a this guy. Kevin Warren murdered the Pac-12. He shook the Pac-12's hands, Larry Scott's hands, and made a pact that they were going to stick together. Then he went behind his back, called Oregon, Washington, USC, and UCLA, took them from the conference. The rest of the teams fled, and he murdered the Pac-12. And by the way, made the Big Ten a ton of money. Whatever you think of his commissionership, made the Big Ten a ton of money because of that move. Kevin Warren would absolutely stab Ryan Poles in the back if he felt that's what he needed to do to move the Bears forward.
Well, and, not to add a little bit of sugar to the cotton candy mix that you're putting together here, Bill, but remind me, Wiederer's report was a couple days removed from a different report that Kevin Warren being involved was actually going to scare head coaching candidates away, and
That's
that
true.
Ryan Poles was unhappy with, reportedly, allegedly, right, was unhappy with the current arrangement, right? So who knows if your sniffer is picking up the right scent, maybe there's a little bit of one team leaked a certain report and somebody else decided that they wanted to make it clear who was in charge. Who's to say? All I'll ask you is this, Bill, because I want to ask you this question. When did a GM become inextricable or become separate from his record? Because I remember a day when a GM who is 11-20 outside of 2022, when that was enough cause to call a GM into question. I am not one of the pitchfork leaders. There are people that hate Ryan Poles' work a lot more than I do, right? But I have a hard time taking all of the major dominoes from Ryan Poles' career, the Matt Eberflus hire, which right now looks like one of the, I think you said bottom two, right, in Bears history?
Yeah, I mean, Abe Gibron in the early 70s, Matt Eberflus, John Fox, those are the three worst guys. And Fox had no talent. Like that roster was barren. I can't talk to Abe Gibron as much. When he was there, that was right after Sears. I mean, Butkus was still there, but he was broken down. I don't know enough about the early 70s Bears. Bobby Douglas was an awful quarterback. All he could do was run.
Right.
But yes, like Matt Eberflus, and that's the one thing where you can make the argument he's the worst coach in Bears history. He never beat the Packers.
Nope.
He didn't win a game on Sunday on the road. I don't even know how that's possible. And the fact that he had talent. We sat there and looked at even last year's roster and said, that's a pretty good defense. This is a offense you could at least win with. And then it was beefed up this year. You could make the argument he's the worst coach in Bears history.
I think you could. Horrendous record in one-score game. Like, there are fun things, not to call some of the stats you mentioned, I don't know, irrelevant. But, you can have a good coach that never beat the Packers. That's only so many games, right? But
he's the only one, Robert.
I know.
On the Packers side as well. Every Packers coach had beaten the Bears. Every Bears coach had beaten the Packers. Except Matt Eberflus.
Oh, I know. I think I brought that up to Jack. I was the one who saw it. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Point is, Bill, to me, the one-score game record is so much crazier.
It
where
is
it's
awful.
He is multiple losses. I think in the order of 8 to 9 losses, worse than the worst one-score game.
Yeah,
he
breaks the graph.
And this is, Bill, may I remind you, with a quarterback in his first 2 years that never succeeded in garbage time. So I can guarantee you none of those were one-score games where you backed into a one-score game. They were all tight ones that you could have won and didn't. So at what point does, I've heard a lot of people, and I get it in theory, that want to take Flus and say, well, that wasn't his hire. Well, there's nothing he could do about it. I get that. But past a certain point, the GM doesn't get another chance just because he deserves one. Is that horrible? Is that horrible rationale?
No, look, this NFL is a tough business, and when things crumble like they're crumbling, you can't sit there and be like, well, he has to get another coach because why? Because he made a trade with a desperate Panthers team whose owner told the GM, go get the number 1 pick. I mean, it was basically straight out of draft day, and Ryan Poles held him hostage and got a phenomenal trade. Then lucked into the idea, which he gets credit for picking the right partner. I'm not 100%. Saying he doesn't. But lucked into not getting the number 3 pick where the Bears have Drake May this year, getting the number 1 pick. He didn't know if the Panthers were going to win 6 games or 3 games. He just knew they were going to be bad. And he called that correctly, and it put him in for that opportunity.
But so then
you have to wear it.
But then after that, he traded a 6th-round pick. I know nobody cares about these things, but I think they're worth bringing up, Bill. Suddenly you're looking at a team with less depth than they should have because we lost 1 interior lineman in Andrew Billings, and the whole defense just crumbled, which is in and of itself ridiculous and signs, in my opinion, of a poor team build. I'm not getting into it. I'm gonna breathe. But so when you then look a little further, it's okay, so we traded a 6th for Dan Feeney for what? For a guy who can't snap? We traded a fourth for Ryan Bates for what? For a guy who can't play, seemingly. And when he isn't on the field, he's no help. When he is on the field, he's no help. So great, right? We've got Coleman Shelton playing major minutes because a center plan that, if memory serves, Bill, you called stupid from Jump Street, right? You said trying to count on Ryan Bates for anything this year is ridiculous and out of pocket. And look at this, right? The guy who never played center turns out to have never been an option. There are, right now, it feels like, innumerable examples to where you don't even have to dig into Keenan Allen having a massive down season. You forgot the other smoking gun where Wiederer implied that, if not outright stated, that the primary reason Shane Waldron was the choice was Ryan Poles.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
That's a good, I liked the Shane Waldron hire. I completely get why you hired him, why you would have thought he was good. Dude, you got to own the results. When you pick a bad stock and you lose a lot of money, you still have to explain it to your wife, and she's still mad about it, right?
Yeah.
And in this case, it's like you picked an awful offensive coordinator. Caleb Williams bemoaned wasted time and a wasted relationship building process, and he's 22. So it's like, what? I look at both. Bill, you've talked to me about this in private. What a shame it is that we look at a stricken Patriots team who's mutinying on their coach and their offensive system, despite having 5 worse linemen than the Bears' current linemen, which, if you don't believe me, look up who those guys are. They are playing like a cohesive unit and looked like one when they came to Soldier Field. Bo Nix is outplaying Caleb Williams, not because he's playing better quarterback, but because his team and his situation are better.
And his coach.
Oh, yeah. I was including that situation. It's like, this is hard to watch, if you ask me. And we might see more with Michael Penix and the Falcons.
Yeah, who knows?
Make a switch. It's like, I personally am having an incredibly hard time looking at a failure to create a positive development scenario around Caleb Williams. Put the record aside, because the record is a separate problem that I definitely have with Poles. You had one actual job this year, and it was to allow Caleb Williams a healthy development environment, and you didn't. So why should you get the baton for what everybody is dubbing the most important decision in Bears franchise future?
It really is. I don't think you can overstate how important this coach hire is. They have to get it right. So the other thing I want to talk to you about with Ryan Poles is process. Because I think Poles, and I gave him credit as well, got a lot of credit for what Ryan Pace dug in on his mistakes and waited for them to fix themselves. And of course they never did. Ryan Poles was able to say that was a mistake and move on. PJ Walker, he says, you know what? That's not going to work. Got rid of him. Just ate the money and got rid of him. Chase Claypool, got rid of him. And we're sitting there saying, all right, well, at least he's seeing his mistakes and he's moving on from them, unlike Ryan Pace. But then when you sit there and say, the whole world knew about Chase Claypool, and he went out and gave the 32nd pick in the draft for Chase Claypool. It should have been a first-round pick, but the Dolphins didn't have their pick because of the Brady situation. So it was, in essence, a first-round pick that he gave away for Chase Claypool. That was a horrible decision. And everyone knew. The Pittsburgh Steelers fans celebrated that trade because they're like, thank God we got rid of this guy, and we got an amazing pick for him.
Number 32.
And it immediately backfired. Now the Nate Davis situation, which, like when I bring this up because I am not Adam Schefter. I am not that plugged in of a guy. I've just been in the media for a long time and I know people. Right. And people tell me, oh, that Nate Davis, that's not going to work out. And I tweeted out, and I reached out to those people about Nate Davis because I wanted to tweet out something positive. Oh, he's a true professional. and then I get this back and I'm like, oh, brother, what are we doing here? But more so than that, in the Wiederer piece, he said, despite strong objections from the coaching staff, Poles went and did it anyway. Now you sit there and be like, well, then what? Bad Eberflus looked at the tape and said, oh, no, I don't think we should sign this guy. No, the thing on that one is Luke Steckel was on that staff. He was the Bears' assistant offensive line coach going into that season. And Luke Steckel had just spent the last 6 or 7 years with the Tennessee Titans, which means you had a coach that spent 4 years with Nate Davis, and Mike Vrabel goes, no, he is not coming back. We do not want him on this team. So Mike Vrabel they just let him go. They went elsewhere with their offensive line. You go to your assistant offensive line coach. You say, what do you think about Nate Davis? And he basically says, because again, Wiederer didn't say it by name, but how is it not Luke Steckel who had strong objections here? And he says, do not hire this guy. He does not have the football character. He is always something wrong with him that isn't really there. You cannot bring this guy into this clubhouse. And Ryan Poles goes, I can do it. How are you not listening to the people around you? How are you not listening to the league? To me, and I had this problem with Ryan Pace a lot of times with like Adam Shaheen in the second round. I'm smarter than everybody else. I'm going to show them that I can make a tight end from Ashland College into Rob Gronkowski. No, you can't. Ryan Poles, I have this great culture. I'll fix Nate Davis. When Mike Vrabel's culture couldn't fix him, to me, that's alarming. And the question moving forward, if you want to keep Ryan Poles, is does he take the necessary information in to make proper decisions that impact this team moving forward? And I don't know if he does.
And it's funny, Bill, right? Because at least for me, this all reminds me, all of this, honestly, the last 6 weeks of discourse has reminded me of everything post-Hail Mary. We're asking questions we would not ask if the results weren't this bad, but they are, right? I hate when it all boils down to wins and losses. But the truth is that if Nate Davis, if Poles had been right, then chances are the Bears might be a couple wins better, and the offensive line would probably look a lot more stable. But it doesn't, because he wasn't. Because you were wrong. And that means we have to ask, why didn't you listen to your assistant coach, dummy? Why didn't you send a blitz on the Hail Mary like every single other team does in football? Simple questions that we're like, well, normally we wouldn't pick at this because nobody else gives up the Hail Mary, right? Normally we wouldn't pick at this because normally Chase Claypool isn't cut within not a calendar year from the moment that a guy that had averaged 600 yards a year joined the Bears. I believe he caught a total of 152 yards, almost all of that coming in the first month of being a Chicago Bear. It was so disastrous that it makes you look back and go, dude, what were we thinking? And I'm all for learning lessons, Bill. All kinds of people warrant second chances. Why wouldn't they? Right? Why shouldn't you trust that a human being could get better at the job? But Bill, at what point do we say to ourselves, well, why has it got to be you, though? What have you – I know you said this just the other day, and I know there are tons that want these games to mean nothing. But, Bill, that screenshot, you know the one I'm talking about, of Bears total yards, 2, 49ers total yards, 310. That kind of thing rings in your ears. And unfortunately, it seems like the kind of thing that sticks with the players too. Because the moment they start thinking that they're worse than the team across from them, you can see it in the play. And it plays out in games like Monday, where they really only get their act together around the second half when the game was already over anyways and they can finally relax. It's tough to watch. And when you crow about a culture, and this is what we see, I don't know how to take you seriously.
Yeah, and by the way, I just looked it up really quickly while you were talking. Chase Claypool, the Bears were 0-11 in games he was active.
0-11. They cut him. They won a game. It was wild.
Yeah. And they won the game before he showed up. Literally, Chase Claypool was sandwiched with 2 wins. You can't make that kind of stuff up. So let me ask you this about Ryan Poles here as we kind of wrap up our conversation, because I think there's a lot of different aspects you can discuss. And like you said, you've got to wear certain things. I've heard a lot of people say, well, now that Matt Eberflus is fired, the rest of this season doesn't really matter. The players are checked out, yada, yada, yada. To me, I'm going to sit here and go, Matt Eberflus was fired with 5 games to go. It's 3 seasons with Ryan Poles here. That's 51 games. So we're going to say that 10% of his tenure doesn't matter. Not when we're evaluating the coaches, when we're evaluating the players. When the players were, let's be honest, we're basically kind of giving the meaty the elbow going, it's all Matt Eberflus. He's an idiot, right? We heard it in their tone. They weren't saying it directly. And then when he was fired, like, oh yeah, Thomas Brown, this is it. This is all going to get better. And this team looks like crap. And yes, they're getting out coached. I'm not sitting there saying the defense is worse with Washington. Eberflus was a better defensive coordinator. You can't even defend it at this point. Thomas Brown is overwhelmed as a head coach, maybe. Well, again, Richard Hightower couldn't have handled it. There was no one on the staff that could have handled it. You may as well try Thomas Brown. But to me, there's an issue with the players. There's concentration issues with players dropping footballs. There's effort issues defensively. They're not swarming tackles. Like there's enough going on where I sit here and say, and people say, well, they're professionals. They should be adults about it and do it. Well, yeah, they should. But that goes to the culture, this culture that Ryan Poles preached about for years that isn't there. It is non-existent. It was a lie. It was a fabrication. It was never there. It just had, DJ Moore could smile for the camera, but it didn't mean he was smiling in the locker room. These kind of things. I'm not calling DJ Moore out specifically. I'm just bringing up an example because he was clearly upset all season. So when we sit here and try and evaluate Ryan Poles, and people say, well, the decision should be made or it shouldn't be made. These last 5 games don't matter. To me, I sit there and go, you want to evaluate the full body of Ryan Poles. How these players perform right now absolutely matters.
I think it does. Now, granted, you're also talking to somebody that thinks that GMs are much harder to fire, or much easier to fire, I should say, than coaches. Because a coach, to use an example, if you hire Ben Johnson and he brings in any defensive coordinator, I could not tell you off the top of my head what defense Robert Saleh runs, but I doubt that Jermaine Edmonds has any role beyond the fact that he's paid a lot of money and therefore we have to keep him, right? You're going to see roster turnover because guys don't fit these systems. And everybody always says, rotate your system. Nobody coaches really outside their system. They may expand the lines a little bit, but they coach what they know. I wouldn't want them to coach something else, right? But a GM, I mean, you're just taking over and you're evaluating all the same players. And you know what? Yeah, if a new GM takes over and doesn't think Caleb's got it, I would like to hear that opinion. That would suck. That would really hurt to hear. But Bill, I think you would agree that if a GM walked onto the roster and immediately started looking at other quarterbacking options, at the very least, you and I are going to ask, wait, what? Because you wouldn't expect it. I would expect the GM to look at a player like Braxton Jones and consider moving on. But Darnell Wright should stay, right? Just like Jalen Johnson stayed after Ryan Pace. Good players stay. So I'm not scared of a new GM. And if you're changing coaches anyways, well, let's be honest. Most of these leagues, or most of these like good teams across the league are run by the coach. You got very few Eagles where the GM is the guy. Most of them are Andy Reid's, right? Kyle Shanahan's, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know what to do here. Because I get all the people that say that these games don't matter, but the Bears seem to agree that they don't matter. And
the players do.
Right. It's like, Bill, I have seen 2 major instances of failure to report over the last bunch of years that I've watched football. And in the only one besides the Bears situation last night, the team cried foul about it for a year, saying, our guy reported, what are you talking about? Then you've got the Bears where he just forgot, right? I've seen more high-profile players fumble out of the end zone walking into the end zone than I've seen.
Doug Kramer did fumble in the end zone, let's not forget.
But I mean, like, just to be clear, I'm talking like the Jonathan Taylor thing, right?
I know.
I've seen more guys drop the football than fail to report. And it is like, that's where we are. Is we're watching a team that is finding inventive ways to wreck games for us. And I don't know how. Like, Bill, let me ask you this. If the team just normal lost, like the Jets do near every week, would you be so disappointed? Or is it the method of failure that is speaking?
It feels different this year because it feels unprofessional.
I agree.
This isn't Matt Nagy games where you get frustrated because you're like, well, why isn't he rolling Mitch out more? Or why isn't he running the football more? It still looks like a professional football team.
Right? That in some of those games, you say they could have won if they did. In these games, you say they didn't have a chance. And they wasn't close. How did this roster become that bad in a matter of months? I don't know. I don't know. I think, Bill, the biggest team building sin that I've seen on the team that I will hammer and hammer and hammer until I'm dead is that you have Andrew Billings, this two-gapping nose tackle, and you leave him with no backup at all. Andrew Billings goes down. Now you slide Javon Dexter, who's been playing solid ball as your 3 technique, over to cover for Billings, and the whole line is worse for it. Who could have seen this coming? Well, to act like Andrew Billings, who's paid Bill $4 million a year, right? To act like he was either invincible and never going to get injured, that's silly. The guy's almost 30. Or B, like he's the most important player on your defense. Both are asinine, in my opinion. We begged for defensive tackle depth, and they said, we've got Zach Pickens. We're not worried about anything. What an embarrassing
And what did you
decision.
see in Zach Pickens' rookie year where you said, we're good?
Bad evaluations, left, right, and center, not limited to rostering Velus Jones to cut him weeks later. What was the point? Like, I'm a Velus defender, dude. But like the way, the method, the process of this 2024 season has been, you played yourself until you could no longer play yourself, and you finally admitted it, and you should have admitted it last offseason. And that's like 5 names, right?
Right.
It is crazy how deep we are in this.
Yeah.
I don't know where else to point.
No, it really is. And as we finish up here, the one thing I just want to say, and I did mention it before you came on, which I eliminated Mike Vrabel. Like I put out those coaching candidates a month ago, whatever it was. And I said, the Bears aren't going to hire Mike Vrabel because of Ryan Poles. Mike Vrabel's going to want to report to basically ownership or to Kevin Warren, at least. That's not going to work. Like that's what I said. But if Kevin Warren is going to blow out Ryan Poles and look for a coach on his own, in essence, and GM and pair them together, well, then suddenly you're looking at a different dynamic where when Ben Johnson told Albert Breer or his agent, wherever Albert Breer got that information, what he said on Amazon a couple weeks ago, that Ben Johnson wants to be aligned with the general manager, and everyone goes, oh, so he wants Ryan Poles to get an extension. Maybe. Or maybe he's saying, no, I want to come in with my own general manager. That's where Ray Agnew makes a lot of sense. He's the assistant GM with the Lions. Or Mike Vrabel comes in with a GM and they are working in tandem where Vrabel is not reporting to the GM. He's reporting directly. Where you sit there and say, maybe Kevin Warren feels the structure is an issue. And again, if you don't like Kevin Warren or not, it doesn't matter. He's the one making decisions right now. Where Kevin Warren feels that is an issue, the structure that they've had, they need to empower a coach, whether that be a Vrabel or a Johnson or maybe someone else. And that's what's going on here. I think it's a fascinating dynamic that may be a signal here that things are truly shifting. Not just, hey, Matt Eberflus got fired in season, things are shifting. They clearly are. That maybe that is another thing that may change, where the Bears change their football operations power structure.
And I think we're at the point, Bill, where any sane Bears fan is just going to have to wait and see, regardless of what the Bears do. But I have to hit you with a double negative because I think it's unfortunately the only way I know how to say this, Bill. In the world of people I distrust in the Bears organization, I keep finding that I distrust Kevin Warren the least. It's not that I trust him. It's that I like every other decision maker less than I like Kevin Warren, right? At least there's some history of Kevin Warren having done a good job before. George McCasty, over 12. Ryan Poles, not a great batting average right now. So
Ryan Poles has a worse record than Matt Eberflus now.
I know. It's tough out there. It's tough out there in Chicago. But so I can't help looking at this and mutter to myself, it's not like the Shane Daboll situation worked great in the Giants in New York. But if that's the path they want to go, give it a shot. At least you wouldn't have 3 guys, coach, quarterback, GM, out of alignment. You'd have 2 in alignment, and you bring Caleb into the fold as quickly as you can, right? So you get as close to lockstep as you're going to be. I don't know. Maybe you do. But there is a piece of this where it's like we have to somehow try to dodge the media frenzy that's going to come out of the next 3 games, including another Packers game, which is just, why is it in Lambeau? Like, why does this one have to be there, right?
Can we just play it at like Northern Illinois? We'll call it a neutral field.
Just don't play the game, maybe. Like, just everybody can move on. But
and the Packers, by the way, if the Vikings lose a couple games, the Packers might be playing for seeding. If the Lions lose a couple games with their banged up, maybe the Packers are even playing for the division. Like it could be bad.
If they win the division, in a season like this, it would probably be like the worst outcome, just in terms of franchise envy, right? Like Bill, it has been hard to watch that the Packers draft Rashawn Gary. Bears fans clown on Rashawn Gary. Rashawn Gary becomes a very good pass rusher. The Packers draft Jordan Love. The Bears clown on Jordan Love. Jordan Love is here. Justin Fields is not. Like, it's all rookie receivers. Christian Watson, the only veteran receiver, out with multiple injuries. Jaden Reed's a superstar. He's everything that Anthony Miller was supposed to be and more. This is ridiculous. This is
haves and have-nots. At least I have the 1980s where I have a memory of the Bears being the have and the Packers being the have-not.
I have Jay Cutler. That's what I've got.
All right. Well, there he is, Robert Schmitz. Robert, I will say thank you for all the work you've done with me over the years, but also thank you to all the content you created for all the Bears fans out there. You will be missed. I know you're not dead. I know you're not going anywhere, but I will say now moving forward that it is clear that the Bears murdered your soul, and that's why you're
Take it with you. I always have fun, Bill. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. All right. There he is. Robert Schmitz, everybody. Gonna miss Robert on the content creation site. Robert's been on this podcast a bunch. We've talked plenty. I've been on his post-game shows, but again, life moves pretty fast and Robert moves on. So we wish him well in his new endeavors and his growing family. So let's get into the mailbag. Before we do it, you know what we got to do. We got to talk a little underdog fantasy. It is the place to play if you're a sports fan looking to win money while watching sports. With over 5 million happy players and 2 billion won, Underdog makes it fun and easy to cash in on all your favorite athletes' performances. Complete against other players just by selecting higher or lower on 2 or more players' stats, and you could win up to 1,000 times your money. So turn every touchdown into a win with Underdog Fantasy. Now, when I play Underdog Fantasy, I like to play Red Zone Rush. I think it's a lot of fun. You just swipe right for yes and left for no when you see the player's face come up on if they're going to score a touchdown. Your entry automatically gets boosted, and you get a 51% profit boost when you play. That's the one I always like to recommend. But like I said, Underdog's available pretty much everywhere. 33 states, including California, Texas, and Georgia. They got all your favorite leagues. You can create entries with football selections and mix and match across other sports. A lot of flexibility with how you can play. Every dog deserves a second chance. Underdog rescues. You can get your money back and receive a promo if an early injury causes your entry to lose. So a lot of coverage there from Underdog. It's great. So if you haven't signed up, here's what you need to do. You need to sign up today, and you need to use the Second City Gridiron promo code, which is CITY, C-I-T-Y. Download the app, use the code CITY, C-I-T-Y, and you will get $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. So make sure you sign up for Underdog Fantasy. We will greatly appreciate it here at Second City Gridiron. Now, you got to be 18 or over, 19 or over in Alabama, Nebraska, 19 or over in Colorado for some of the games, and 21 or over in Massachusetts and Arizona. You got to be present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Void in Colorado. Concerned with your play? 1-800-GAMBLER or www.ncpgambling.org. Arizona, 1-800-NEXT-STEP. 800-639-8783. Next Step, text 53342. New York, the 24/7 Hope line at 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. That is our friends at Underdog Fantasy. So please make sure you sign up today. Now, let's get into the mailbag. Let me bring it up here on the old phone. Always prepared I am for these. So we'll get to some of these here, and we will wrap up this podcast, and we will see what goes on here the rest of the way with the Chicago Bears. All right, Lafferty Daniel, deep in your plums, how would you rank the likelihood of the next guy being Johnson, Vrabel, or the field? All right. This is not on any inside information. I'm going to see Ben Johnson 45%, Mike Vrabel 30%, Field 25%. How's that? Bear down. Baba Bear. Preference on leader of men Vrabel plus Josh McDaniels OC or offensive scheming nice guy Ben Johnson plus insert grizzled DC. All right, Josh McDaniels. I don't want Josh McDaniels. And here's what I'm going to say. Remember Mike McCoy? Does that name ring a bell? Mike McCoy, who was deemed the next offensive guru maybe about 10, 12 years ago and collapsed as a head coach. You want to know why? Because Mike McCoy's only success came with Peyton Manning in Denver. Now, Josh McDaniels has been around a lot longer than Mike McDaniels' few years with Peyton Manning. But quick, name a year where Josh McDaniels had success with someone not named Tom Brady. Do you really want to entrust Caleb Williams with a guy who is not very likable and hasn't had success away from Belichick or Brady at all? Failed with the Raiders, failed with the Broncos, failed with the Rams as an offensive coordinator. He doesn't have it. You want to take one mediocre year with Mac Jones as the reason to give Josh McDaniels the keys to the Bears' future with Caleb Williams? No, thank you. So if it's Vrabel with that, that's it. My decision's over. All right. In your opinion, from Jay Haggart 1, in your opinion, should Poles and the Bears part ways? I am leaning yes. And I'm really wondering, I really said I wanted stability around Caleb Williams, but I'm really, that Dan Wiederer piece opened my eyes that there are decisions Ryan Poles is making at Hallis Hall that I was not aware he was making, that I thought he was dealing with decisions from others versus making them yourselves. Two very different things. And I think that is seriously making Ryan Poles' seat quite warm. Barely interesting. What is the industry view on a guy like Liam Cohen and Joe Brady? It sounds like the Bears are pretty heavily leaning towards an offensive guy. Johnson may be the top guy, but just curious about the other offensive guys around the league. Both those guys are looked at very favorably. Liam Cohen was looked at favorably when he was the offensive coordinator in Kentucky. Both those guys very favorably. Joe Brady did some amazing things at LSU with Joe Burrow. There's ties there. And obviously this Bills offense has been phenomenal this year, what he's done with Josh Allen. So both those guys are good. Now, I will say, I do not have a read. I do not have a take on what the league thinks about them as potential head coaches. Do they have it? We've heard Ben Johnson. Ben Johnson may, not be that Dan Campbell in your face kind of guy. There's other ways to build culture and be a leader without being that type, but we'll see about that with Ben Johnson. That's why I think a good supportive staff with those type of other coaches that have that ability will be a good way for him to doing it. Tango Robinson, Marley Brando. Is this what taking the North back looks like? No, it doesn't. And that's why Ryan Poles may lose his job. Coach Dan, will the pain ever stop? That's my question. If this coaching hire fails, Dan, it won't. Because if this coaching hire fails, then Caleb Williams may fail. And when is it going to stop? At that point, when is it going to stop? And is it time for us to give up on this franchise? We're at a breaking point here, people. We are at a breaking point, because if they don't get Caleb Williams right, where is there any evidence that they are ever going to get this right? And we got one more question here. Let's finish up with Ed Holinsky. However the Bears mess ends at the end of the season, does the new regime keep what's salvageable or take a chainsaw to the rest of the roster? Ed, I think because of the structure right now, they're not going to be able to take a chainsaw to the roster. So you're going to have to like some of these pieces. Jalen Johnson is locked down, right? Kevin Byard's only here for a year. Jaquan Brisker's only here for a year. You can change up the safeties if you want. Kyler Gordon's only here for a year. Tyreek Stevenson for 2 years. So you can tweak the secondary, but you have Jalen Johnson. Now, that's not a bad thing. Linebackers. Tremaine Edmonds is still going to be here for another year after this year. You're stuck with him. He has too much guaranteed money. TJ Edwards, do you want to get rid of him? He's not great in coverage, but he's good at other things. So the linebackers, you can change them up after a year or so. The defensive front, you're going to have to decide if you want to sign Javon Dexter. Andrew Billings just got a little bit of an extension. Montez Sweat got a big extension. So that's a decision. Those are kind of DeMarcus Walker. You can let walk away and change that out. Offensive line, they're probably going to want to keep Darnell Wright. That would be surprising if they let him just walk away, but they will not keep Tevin Jenkins. They will not keep Ryan Bates. They will not keep Coleman Shelton. Will they keep Braxton Jones for a year and then maybe try and replace him? Yeah. Caleb Williams is locked in. DJ Moore is locked in. Cole Kmet is locked in. DeAndre Swift has at least one more year of guaranteed money. So chainsaw won't happen, but you'll see a pretty significant turnover of the roster. Now, Ryan Pace kept 5 guys from Phil Emery, and I believe Ryan Poles is going to keep 4 guys from Ryan Pace. That number is going to be higher, I think, for this new general manager if Poles is gone. Like Caleb Williams, Cole Kmet, DJ Moore, Darnell Wright, Montez Sweat, Jalen Johnson, probably a couple other guys. That's going to be like 8 or 9. So you're going to have some of the core players here, but you will still see a significant turnover. It won't be tear it down to the studs and start over, but we may see some players get traded for, mid, 4th round picks, that kind of thing. We may see some guys walk away and not, in free agency where you said, hey, you shouldn't have let him go. They should have re-signed him. You may see some things like that to get this GM to get his new stamp on here. And Wick, by the way this roster has failed to bounce after Matt Eberflus got fired, are you clamoring for these guys? Because I'm not. It's been really disappointing what this team has showed on the other side of Matt Eberflus. All right, let's wrap it up with our usual prediction. It's the Detroit Lions. They're a good football team. The Chicago Bears are not a good football team. That means the Chicago Bears will lose to the Detroit Lions. I actually think the Bears are going to keep this close. It's in Chicago. It's going to be cold. The Lions are really banged up. So I think this game is going to be a little more interesting, but I just don't see the Bears coaching staff versus the Lions coaching staff. It's not even close. And I think when you look at a game like this, you have to consider that. So I'm going to say the Bears lose this one like 24-20. That feels like somewhere where this could be. I thought the Bears were only going to lose to the Vikings by 7. I got that wrong. But either I maybe changed it to 10, but either way, was off there. Obviously, that one was not nearly as close. I think the Bears get this a little closer, but I still think they end up on the wrong side of this one. So we'll go 24-20 Detroit. Now, I'm taking next week off the podcast with the holidays. I will probably get a podcast in the week after. That's the week of New Year's. May just be a shorter podcast with just me and no guest. Then we'll get back into it in January, kind of wrapping up the week 18 aspect of it. And of course, the coach and possibly GM search. We will do plenty of stuff around that news as well. So we'll talk to you in a couple weeks. Bear down, everybody. Hang in there. Adios.